Okay, everyone, we are back, and you've all had a chance to reflect now on what kinds of theological messages. What is this experience you've had tell you about God? So, Bruce, let's take it on again.
We'll do a two-step process. What I want to do is invite the grant recipients back to reflect upon my experience and to create a kind of grounded theology based on that. And then I will ask them to share anything that they've got from their own exercise of their own experience. They don't have to share their experience, but if there's anything they want to make, any observations or anything that's come out of their experience, and then I'll open it to everybody. So 3 steps. We'll start with, first of all, grant recipients, looking at my experience of communion at All Saints, and ask you to propose in a sentence a grounded theology based on this experience. And it might help you to imagine this is all you know about God, just this experience. What would your theology be if this was all you knew about God? So I'm going now to the grant recipients, and I invite them to unmute themselves and to contribute on that basis.
If I can begin.
Yes.
I think that God is a welcoming God, if you like, a welcoming God.
So God welcomes.
Yes.
Who does he welcome?
As well.
At least me.
Someone who is not sure of himself. Someone who is not quite sure of himself. Yeah.
Not sure of himself. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So God welcomes the uncertain.
I think God is personal.
Okay. Personal.
God is personal, yes.
So one thing that suggests about this experience is the personal nature of God.
I think so.
I think that's true too. There's something about it that's personal. What else does it suggest to you theologically? Anything else?
Yeah. This is Akimayo. I think it presents an approachable God.
Yes.
And a God who fixes things. I mean, you were down, and this is the same guy who's going to fix it.
So he repairs broken relationships almost with him, or him or her, however we understand God. But God is approachable. He fixes. He or she fixes things.
We have a comment, written comment here from Satarku again, saying God is a possibility.
Okay, that's slightly more abstract. But could I ask her to go further with that? Push that on a bit further. Possibility of what? Or is he just primal possibility, suggesting? I don't know. I'm trying to understand what he or she's saying.
Yes. Okay, that's good. Please go further, my friend. He says that we can endlessly define God.
We limit God by our definitions. Is that the implication?
He says we open God.
I'm not following on that one, so I'll just need a little bit more exploration of that if possible.
Others, Jesse says the fragility of faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what part, Jesse, does God play in that when we're fragile in our faith?
I would say that God is always present.
Yes.
You know, even though we go through this emotional tumult of doubting ourselves, our relationship with God, you know, God is always present. I mean, God is in the whole of your conversation. You're feeling lost because you're feeling removed from God.
Yes.
You go into this place and God is there. So God is never absent in your narrative. But then faith is so fragile that it doesn't see this present nature of God.
Yeah.
Yes, we blind ourselves almost.
Yeah, we have several comments here referring to God's mercy, God's redemption, God's reconciliation.
So that gets to the character of God. So if we only had this experience, we know that God does all of the above. He does all those things.
To talk about this broken relationship, God's desire to heal, God's saving grace to the broken.
Yes. So we've got a fundamental view of God as active. So this experience suggests that God is active to welcome, to bring to healing or redemption our brokenness, which we have in our fragility of faith. Do you see how I'm bringing together some of the themes that are in fact been suggested by you? It becomes theology because it's words about God and our relationship to God or our faith.
Yeah. Several comment also on God's knowability. Can we explore God's nature, or is God unknowable, or how do we construct God?
Excellent. I agree.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And in fact, are we just imposing our experience on God?
Yeah, I thought my experience was that we bring our brokenness and it's almost an exercise and we create our own guilt. So, and we project it onto God, who in fact challenges our guilt or our brokenness with his welcome or her welcome.
I see Domain and Rachel want to say something.
Please.
Thank you. Just to follow up, I think with regards to I find the idea of God and rejection in this example quite interesting, because I mean, to a large extent, we've got this anthropomorphic idea of God, and in a way reducing God to you could say human fragility, human sentiments, and how we behave and how we respond when confronted with being offended, which to a large extent I think is fundamentally problematic, especially when reflecting on God, because I mean ultimately God is not human. I mean, if we understand God the way we think we understand God, then to associate these human characteristics to God would be a little bit limiting, don't you think?
Well, where I was going with that, and I really appreciate your comment, is do we need anthropomorphic categories to understand God? I mean, is it coming from us or is it coming from God? And what you're suggesting is that it comes from us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I mean, and of course, we all experience God in different ways, but, it's also, it's like having a shadow and trying to jump over it, especially in terms of, our understanding, our language, our understanding of the world, cosmology, etc. So I'm just grappling with this idea. I mean, in a way, it also speaks to my experience and my example, which is also, that grappling with what is really from God and what is really from me and my experience. So it's those kinds of internal conflict that you also refer to in your example, which is also reflected in, I think, to a large extent in my example.
Look, I think you're spot on. Now, how do we create theology from this experience? Can you suggest a way forward? I mean, one question is, what is the role of these anthropomorphic categories in our understanding of God? Do we actually need them? Like, do we construct our gods? Do we create idols? It could be a reflection on idolatry. Are idols necessary? I mean, these are some of the questions that might come out of such an exploration. But we need to push these questions that you've got. You're saying is, what I hear you saying is that, you know, what do we bring to God? And how does that limit us? It's certainly not an accurate picture of God. So how do we create a God without anthropomorphic categories? Would be a question that I would respond.
Mhm. Rachel had a comment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what is very applicable to Malawi in terms of practical theology is this idea of a relationship between liturgy, church liturgy,
Yep.
and God's judgment. Here
Oh,
it is it's quite an issue because in many cases Christians seek affirmation of their faith, I mean vitality of their faith, if they are able to comply with the liturgical qualifications to qualify for a liturgical service. And in this case that you had an internal conflict, it just
Yes.
shows that even in your world there, it is very, very true that liturgy can either affirm somebody as a good, to be a good Christian or not, you know? So you had that internal conflict. And I think here in Malawi, it is something which can be also a research question to delve into, especially in the looking at the relationship between adherence to liturgy and also how that portrays the image of God and who God is. That's
what would you say? I mean, I'm very struck by the fact that you're looking at it liturgically. I mean, it should have been obvious to me as an Anglican minister.
Yeah, it's amazing that that people have not spotted that out. But here in Malawi, you know, we are in Africa, we are very ritualistic people, and liturgy is very important, very central in our in our Christian experience. You know, we work so hard to make sure that we become compliant to liturgical demands. You know, so this is a very, very important practical theological question that you have posed to us.
Let me ask you, Rachel, what is the theology of liturgy suggested by this experience? Can you put it as a theological statement?
Exclusion due to errant behavior.
Yes.
Errant behavior, not in accordance to the individual, the congregant, but really in accordance to the church tradition, because the church traditions have their own measurements of what is errant and what is not errant. For example, this is at oral communion at all saints. But if you were in my church, the Baptist church, whatever you did might have been not considered to be errant at all. So you would have been free to enjoy the liturgical services without really. In fact, this issue of internal conflict came to this individual, either it's you or you not, but came to this because it is imposed by the theology of the church, the communion at all saints. But if you belonged to another church, there was no possibility of having that internal conflict, because actually the liturgy would have probably exonerated you from that. So that's that.
Okay, so you've got some dynamic elements that I'm hearing in this, and one of them is the church's tradition, the communal nature. The whole church was gathered, the people were gathered, and you have a representative of God and the people in the priest or the minister up the front. I wasn't conducting the communion. And you've got all of these dynamics. You've got me as the isolated individual who's guilty and turmoil and lost. And I come into a community, I come into a tradition, I come into a liturgical service, and I find forgiveness or welcome. Now, surely those elements are a theology, a part of a theology. Is that correct? That's what I think you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
How would you put it into words? Those are the dynamics. what is the theology that is suggested by this experience in terms of those dynamics: tradition, communal gathering, liturgical expression, and some sort of representative, whether it's a pastor or a minister?
That our God is transcendent of the representative of any church tradition and community of Christians. He's beyond that, you know.
Yes.
And we can experience him over and above all of those people. In other words, they are not representatives of God, although we have to use correct language there. In fact, theology is difficult because the language, even to talk about these things, is very difficult. But really, I think you understand that. I think from this experience, our experience with God transcends, goes beyond our relationship to our communities and traditions, and liturgies, practices.
Well, I think there's a balance, isn't there? There's both God is transcendent, but the experience of God you're suggesting is mediated. It's mediated by tradition, by community, by representatives, by liturgy.
But not always in an affirmative way. This is the theology.
I hear that as well. Sometimes.
Actually, I think I'm taking this conversation away from the positive positionality, but I'm trying to think about how tradition, liturgy, can also be a negative, you know, can be negative too. So in this case, I think for where I come from, for example, we just lost a pastor here through suicide, and he left a note on which he indicated these words: "Bury me as a sinner." That's what he said, because he knew that in the church which he served, everyone who commits suicide is buried like less than a human being. You don't even go there you don't offer any liturgical service or things like that. So if you come here in Africa, this experience you have put forward there, I think someone can write a book on that. Actually,
I think you're right. You could definitely write a book on that. And there's
just
a
on
research
liturgy,
project.
and sure.
It's very powerful when the man in this guy says the man of God commits suicide and can't even be buried in the church. Is that correct?
You know, even the church pastors don't go to that funeral, or if they go without any pastoral regalia. Even here there are church women's groups which usually dress such funerals, but they cannot do that. If they do that, then they will also be expelled from the church.
Wow. So this raises questions of chaos, of in some way spiritually demonic. I mean, you know, what is released in this sort of experience? What categories do we use to understand it? I mean, I think you're right. It's powerful, it's negative, and it's certainly brokenness in a very big way.
I think we come to the first question, the first theme which you brought to us, and that is the issue of identity. What kind of identity do we have within the context of our tradition? And also, what identity do we have in the presence of God? You know, there is a disconnect sometimes. Our identities of who we are before God and identities of who we are in the traditional church, they often do not match.
Okay, it's very powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Rachel.
Right. While Rachel's been interacting with you, Bruce, a number of comments about, you know, anthropomorphism, saying, you know, what do we make of that? Rudolph says God welcomes our approach, so long as it reminds us of our limitedness. And then Edson, with thanks to Joachim, who translated, our crises are a way for God to manifest in us and for us. It's a way to him to show his essence. And then Paul once again says, here's a time of crisis and individuals move to the source of peace and forgiveness. And then is liturgy, a couple of people ask, is liturgy a hindrance, or is it in fact a lived theology? So, you know, some really interesting questions about God's presence, our mediate, how it's mediated to us, how we mediate it to ourselves. Maybe you want to speak to these.
Well, I just think it's wonderful. No, I think that this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for fertility almost in thinking. And what we've got is people reacting, thinking, asking questions. See, this, you know, this raises wonderful questions. I think the questions are far more important than the answers. You know, what do we do with our questions? You know, I mean, to me, at the very beginning of our research, that was what Professor Jim was talking about yesterday. You know, our questions are what guide us, and it's all there. Do you see that these questions have to be asked again and again in each culture and each time, and we need to. That's why we keep needing to do original theology. Because we don't, the answers of Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or John Calvin, you know, are they going to answer some of these questions we're asking today? Some they will, yes, of course. And I'm not saying they're not brilliant minds and deserve to be read 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 years later. Of course they do. But we can also set ourselves free to be original theologians as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think I'm encouraging you to do. Let me ask you now, and I'm opening this not just, well, let me start with the grant recipients. Do any of you have any reflections on doing your own experience? You've engaged with me on my experience. What happened when you did your own experience? You don't have to share your experience, but if you can just share how you worked with it or what came out of it for you. And maybe, Joel, you had some sort of experience. Do you want to say something about your experience of working with yours? I'm going to dive you in.
Sure. Should I just convey it?
You start with it. You start with it. And then
Okay.
We'll
So the experience that I talked about is one of the most powerful in my life, and it's a sense of call that came to me and caused an abrupt change in my career. I was provost at Calvin University. I was asked to give a plenary address at Baylor University on issues of faith and learning. And I looked at what other people were saying on the program, and they said that, I said, this is all about kind of a North Atlantic Christian intellectual world. And of course, Christianity is mostly found elsewhere in the world. So what does that mean to us? And I said, it, you know, my one sentence message was, it changes everything. But as I'm writing this talk, all of a sudden, I can't sit down and I start to weep and I pace the floor. And it was, you know, I'm sure it was God speaking to me saying, you advocate these things. I want you to get more directly involved.
Wow.
You know, God shook me emotionally to get my attention.
Yes.
And so I was praying, Lord, what do you want me to do, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually what came out of that, friends, is the Nagel Institute. But what I took out of that, kind of the cluster of things, is God urging, God summoning, God grabbing.
God grabbing. I love it.
You know, I love that phrase of the Apostle Paul that, you know, I take hold of that which has gotten hold of me. And so, you know, my one sentence about what I learned about God, I presume from this, is that God has an agenda, God has a mission to which God summons us.
Yes. Very different experience to mine, but glorious experience.
Right.
Wonderful stuff. And so God is a God of summons.
Yeah.
You see how that's constructed through your experience?
Yeah.
Well done. That's terrific. Okay. Anyone else who would like to share their reflection on what their experience was? I'm quite happy for you. It's flexible and as what Joel just did and showed so well done what he did.
I see.
We'll start with grant recipients and then we'll go to the bigger group.
Okay. Grant recipients.
Yeah, I'm Eunice.
Eunice.
Yes, I would like to share my experience.
Please.
My parents were not Christians really, and my father was kind of pagan, but very poor. So, but I met Christ early because my brother was a man server in a Catholic church. But I started attending a Catholic charismatic renewal. I became a choir member. So one day I was at a fellowship and I went to minister in songs, and then later on, a couple invited me to their house to see them. So when I got to their house, they told me that at separate times, God spoke to them to take care of me. They were not at the same room at the same time that God spoke to them. They were in different rooms. And then incidentally, that period, another lady who was like a role model to me called me too and said, God asked her to take care of me. It was profound. And you know, from then on, these people started mentoring me. They mentored me up till today. That couple are like my parents, and this is over 30 years. They are still like my parents. They take care of me spiritually and all that, you know. So what I learned from that experience was that it was as if God took me from a place where I had no hope, I had no future. Remember, I was not born into a Christian family, but I just found myself, I felt I was lost. But God found me, that God could speak to people concerning me. It was profound for me, it was spiritual. And it opened my eyes to a lot of things about God, that God is awesome. He can pick up anybody he wants to pick up. He can use anybody he wants to use, and he can, you know, cause anything to happen in the life of an individual. That was my spirit.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Eunice. Anyone else?
Yes, hello.
Hello, Florence.
Yes, please. I think I just want to say here, because it's not as though it's a testimony time to share what God has been doing or how God has actually intervened in my own affair. But I just want to say that for maybe while I was growing up anyway, when I newly got married, I think I had an encounter with God, though not physically, but in my dream. When I got married, few months into the marriage, I was pregnant, but I had a miscarriage. So when I had this miscarriage, you know, that was 4 months miscarriage. So it was really, you know, there was a kind of evacuation after that. And after that, I was not so strong. But then there was a particular night I was, I already started the master's program. So I was in my hostel. I prayed before sleeping. At the same time, while I was asleep, my husband and a pastor's friend were at home praying. So I had a dream. And I met this pastor in the dream. The pastor just told me, I know you have been through this miscarriage, but don't worry, you will take in, and this time around, nothing will happen to it. There will be no miscarriage, there will be no loss. Just make sure that you did not allow, or you do not allow any nurse in a particular hospital to touch your stomach for the period that you will be attending an antenatal or something like that. So I was like curious because prior to having that dream, that very day, somebody suggested I go to the medical or to an hospital to complain about the pains I was going through. So I told the person I will go. So when I now had a dream, it was like a divine instruction, but don't allow any nurse to touch you for that particular period, but you will be pregnant. That was the instruction. So I woke up, I realized it was a dream. I was like, this is the man of God that we all know, so popular in that dream. And he just came to me and told me that. So immediately when I woke up in the morning, I just said, I'm not going to go to the hospital, at least for now. I never went there. The instruction was quite followed. And then after some times, I realized that I was curious. Oh, when will I now get pregnant again? When will I now get pregnant again? It didn't immediately happen, but it happened like 9 months after. But ever since, I will tell you that it was like God was really consistent, because immediately I had that, I took in 9 months after I gave birth to twins, after that 9 months. After that twins, I still had triplets. After that triplet, I had one, it was like God kept to his word before, I just had to put an end to everything. It is well.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So what's your theology of God from that experience? How would you express it maybe in a sentence or two?
To me, God is awesome. You can, it's unfathomable. You can't fathom him. You can't, comprehend him. He's just God. All knowing.
Okay.
All knowing.
Okay, that's good. Also, you could think about dreams, the role of dreams in God speaking to us. That's something that comes out of your experience. And so I know you said something about testimony, but I think if you're going to do a grounded theology, I think that testimony is one of the best ways to begin any sort of theological reflection. If you want to start grounded up and go from the ground up, start with testimony. I mean, I think it's just rich and wonderful. But anyway, continue on. Anyone else want to share anything?
Anybody? Don't be shy.
Okay, let me give it a try.
Okay, Teo.
This is Tayo, where you're from Nigeria. Part of Ogumbi is a group. My experience happened this year. Actually started last year, December. Diagnosed with a tumor on my spine, and I was given a 50-50 chance. So this year they had the surgery. I couldn't pray. I was just living life as it comes per day. So there was no strength for me to pray. But I was also not bothered. I don't know how that I couldn't pray, but I was also not bothered about it. But things I started looking back, had to call people that I need. Probably I had I stepped on their toes. Forgive me. Forgive some other people in my life. More like a death experience, and trying to clear the pathway to heaven one way or the other. So on the day of the surgery, however, I've been told that there is possibility to change the spinal cord to some iron bars and everything. I was told I would need 8 pints of blood. Doubt all those were prepared, and but as I was being wheeled into the operation room, I summoned the courage to pray just a simple one-line prayer. God, I don't need anybody's blood but the blood of Jesus. And I was told during the after the surgery that there was no blood used. Every of the tumor that were connected to the spine popped up on its own, came out after they opened up the back, and I was just thankful to God for it. So I felt more like a spiritual rebirth. I felt God being a doctor and operating me in that operation room. And even though most of the doctors were pastors that I knew in my church or as a friend, I felt the blood of Jesus is real and available. I also felt that um, prayers doesn't have to be uh, gym jam or everything like Dr. Benson made mention of violent prayers before they are answered. It was more of a simple prayer, and I felt a divine healing, and I felt a renewed purpose in life. So those were my thoughts after the surgery. An hopeless situation becoming hopeful because of a simple prayer. Time to forgive and to be forgiven because of a death experience. Courage to pray even though there was no strength to pray. Life purpose, and those were my reflections during the period. Thank you, sir.
That was very good. Can I ask you, if all you knew about God was that experience, which is rich and wonderful, okay, what could you conclude about God from that experience?
God is a doctor.
God is a doctor. That's
Yes.
it. Yeah. God is the doctor. Okay, well done. Grounded theology.
Yes.
101.
So Felicity has an experience to discuss.
Yeah, so I think the whole of last month, I had a couple of experiences. Like every other person, I had very wonderful expectations for the month. Had to travel for a conference, had to do a couple of things around too. But then my whole life was thrown out of gear, I would say, from my perspective, but repositioned in a different way. And that has actually led me to rethink of an indigenous concept or, of an indigenous concept we use for God, that is to say that he sees the unforeseen or the unknown. And that grants us, or that has some kind of implications on our lives as a people, our lived experiences, and our faith. Just to chip in a very quick experience I had, I think it began with very strange medical condition I wasn't very conversant with. It left me really weak, and I didn't really know how to get around it. So I checked in with my GP, and I had to run a couple of tests. But the day before I went, I think the morning of my appointment, I had a very interesting dream. And in this dream, I happened to be in a particular area I'm very conversant with, and I had to cross the road from one end to the other. But as I did, I saw a very strange personality I have never experienced all my life. This person was really radiant and glorious. But surprisingly, I heard someone say audibly that that was the angel of death. I couldn't just piece together the glorious and the awesome nature of this person to the experience or what I had heard about him, as in the particular assignment he carried out. But then he went past me and then handed a note over to a lady that was coming directly after me. And I heard him audibly say to the lady that it is time. So the lady took the note from him, but she happened to be a very happy-go-lucky lady. And so she, jumping and running, bypassed me, went ahead of me and stood at a point, took a close look at the note. It was then that she noticed that it was actually time. She dropped the note and then she started screaming. At that point, I woke up. That very morning, I had to check into the hospital and I had a couple of surprises. Had to run a couple of tests. Some were scary, others were quite okay. And soon after that, I think after dealing with that, I hadn't even finished dealing with that first situation. And then again, I was down with COVID. It was a very terrible experience. But I come back again to the whole indigenous understanding of God as being all-knowing and being all-revealing. And I like it in the indigenous context because it allows us to now interrogate what really we mean by all-knowing and not just the Western understanding of it.
Yes.
I had been down and I struggled for several days, not knowing exactly what was wrong with me until I think 2 days before I had to take a flight. And then I went in for the COVID test. I tested positive. And this was around the time I was recovering. I had been very sick. And this was around the time I was recovering. And so I started appreciating the all-knowing nature of God, his ability to grant us strength through revelations that we have. And this is one interesting aspect of African Christianity. We hammer so much on that kind of revelation that God continues to give. So it doesn't remain the experience of Mary, neither does it remain the experience of Elizabeth, but it becomes our own experience. And now when that is translated into our walk with God in indigenous concepts and perspectives, it begins to give us much more meaning. I will not be able to come up strongly with what I want to, my theology of God now, or my understanding of who God is. But I want to now begin to grapple with what we mean by Ehuntehunu, the all-knowing God, within my indigenous thoughts. And that is where I find myself now. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That's actually a wonderful, I think that's a summons or a call in Joel's language. You've been summoned to do exactly that, Felicity. That's a wonderful call. And I also add that it's interesting to me that two people so far have talked about being revealed through dreams. Is that an African thing? Is that you listen to your dreams? But I love your much bigger theme of the all-revealing God and how he or she, how we understand God has to be understood in terms of indigenous categories and experience. I just think that's a gift. That's a gift to the whole world, not just to Africa, to the whole world.
Bruce, it's interesting that the chat line has lit up on dreams. You know, it truly is a very important part of African spirituality.
Has anyone written a theology of dreams from an African perspective?
Good question. What do you all know about that?
Well, let me just say this. There's so much about theology of dreams, especially when you talk about the healthcare system. There's quite a lot of messages and prescriptions and diagnoses that go on. They're revealed in dreams and people just wake up and very confidently, they just go ahead with whatever they have dreamt about. So yes, there's quite a bit of dreaming going on.
Okay, well, I'd like to open it up to people who are non-grant recipients. So if anyone, you've now got my permission to share your experience and what you came up with through your exercise in grounded theology. If anyone would like to do that, I limited it initially to the grant recipients, but I'm happy if someone would like to share who's not a grant recipient, maybe next year's grant recipient.
Yeah, I know Jehu has done a lot. One of his important works was based on field work, and then reflecting theologically on it. And maybe Jehu, you'd like to say something about it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So, well, actually, I don't want to so much say something about my own work. By the way, I'm Jehu Ansels. I teach in Canberra School of Theology at Emory University here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was hoping to have an opportunity really towards the end, Bruce, to ask you a more specific question. So I'm happy to wait because you're in the middle of getting.
I'm happy for you to ask now because we might not get an opportunity. So please just
sure.
ask.
Okay. All right. So this is a wonderful session, as you are aware already. It's been generative of a lot of questions and responses. I consider myself a social historian, and it's an approach to history that's also from the bottom up, and it's really what informs the question I want to ask you. I think it would be a good idea for you to share with the group some of the pitfalls of grounded theory or grounded theology. The reason there are two that come to my own mind. So one has to do with the fact that it generates data overload. There's a surfeit of data when you go from the bottom up. You're dealing with lived experiences. It's messy. It can get chaotic. And as you noted yourself earlier, grounded theory scholars end up being largely descriptive. Part of the reason is just the abundance of data, and it's difficult to get to theory and explanation. So that's one potential pitfall. Another that comes to my own mind has to do with the tendency towards hyper-subjectivity. That in fact the researcher ends up, with their own view. In this case, maybe particular experiences, particular views of God, becoming the main driving force for their thinking and analysis. So I would say a few minutes ago you made a comment. It was a quote actually. What is most individual is most universal.
Yes.
I don't believe I agree with that. But that's a separate issue. But that's an example of the kind of sort of approach and thinking that I feel can be a pitfall. So in any case, those are my examples. What I'm asking you is maybe you can share with the group as they embark on years worth of research in their project. Maybe you can share what in your mind are some of the limitations or potential pitfalls of working with grounded theory or generating grounded theology.
Thank you, Jehu. I think that's a wonderful question. In a sense, it reveals my weakness, and my weakness is that I tend to have a short attention span as a scholar. So I think most good scholars spend 20 years or 30 years developing a theory, writing books about it. But if you were to look at my publications, you'd find I don't spend more than 6 months with any idea before I've gone on to something else. So in fact, I suffer from this very short attention span. And that's why I was somewhat embarrassed when I looked back at my own publications in the area. I realized I hadn't really developed it. And in fact, I have to admit to you, the pitfalls have never even occurred to me. So, I thank you for that. I think you're very astute with both of those pitfalls, and they never occurred to me. So I think because, I haven't even thought about this grounded theology for years. I went on and did infant spirituality, and I've been, doing other things. So look, I think that's maybe a strength of mine, that I can look at something very briefly and come up with some ideas. and then maybe let others take it on. But definitely, this is for others to take on. I will not return to grounded theology, but I will be very delighted that some of this has been found seminal in some ways, and others. I've had a lot of people write to me and talk about it, and I'm very happy to follow it up with people. But it won't be me that takes it further, and it'll be someone like yourself, Jehu.
Well, no, I appreciate the honest response. And again, I want to be clear that I affirm, you know, the interest generated in this and the potential it presents for all our researchers and scholars. And so, yes, there are questions there for us to explore going forward. And another area for me has to do with, you responded to this, has to do with the role of literature review. And I feel that that's been a mistake. And I've been around, you know, scholars who use grounded theory for a long time. And I think that some of them realize quite far into the research that ignoring or overlooking, you know, diligent literature review can be a problem. Because it means that eventually, when you seek to analyze and explain, you have no idea what has already been said. and you can spend a lot of time on particular reflections on ideas that actually are well-covered terrain. So for instance, you asked the question, are there theologies of dreams in Africa? If somebody sets out without paying attention to the literature, and that turns out to be an area of emphasis, they may well find out after months of work that they're reinventing the wheel, that in fact, some of what they see or feel is fresh, is a breakthrough, is innovative, actually turns out to have been well treated, well covered, well analyzed in existing literature. So I would say, in addition to the two I mentioned, that you know, the tendency to either ignore or place little value on literature review is a weakness of grounded theory. And I suspect that this group is not going to make that mistake, because these are seasoned scholars. They understand the value and merit of making sure you understand the discourse, you know, the state of the discussions, debates, and arguments to inform your work, because that's how you know you're going to make a contribution. But you would find there are many scholars of grounded theory who you know, insist that getting into the research, into the work without the burden and distractions or weight of earlier ideas and so on is the way to go. I disagree, and apparently you also have questions with that too. But you're right. I mean,
yes, I agree.
Yeah, we have to embrace the rich possibilities and creativity for theological construction and innovation. For Africans, that would always be in community. That would always be a reflection of a shared heritage with a view of the collective. So I feel that in the African context, grounded theory actually has possibilities that are unrealized, it seems to me, yes, in many Western settings. So, I mean, and again, rich possibilities, but we should go into this with a clear sense of its limitations and potential pitfalls. That's something we owe to ourselves as scholars, you know, taking time off on a grant with a limited time frame.
I agree, and it's very embarrassing to find your pet theory has already been discussed when you get to the review stage for your article. So, yes. So I think your advice is timely and very welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joel. I think we have time perhaps to interact with another of the program advisors. So I'm asking Moenda, Henrietta, Damaris, any thoughts? We have about 5 minutes before end of session. Well, they
No,
they're
I just want to,
oh, here's
to
Henrietta. Yes.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bruce. Your presentation has really left me scratching my head and thinking so much into about what you have discussed and the exercise we've been doing. But so far, what Jehu said, that was what I was thinking also about, especially the issue when you talked about leaving out literature review. Personally, I've used grounded theology as grounded theory for other works, but I didn't see the need to leave out literature review because it also helped me when I came back in my analysis to be able to position myself in the midst of the literature that has been done, in the midst of the research that has been done, and to say, yeah, I acknowledge this literature, acknowledge this research, but this is what is missing from that research, and this is what I am bringing into this field of study. So I don't think we should encourage the grantees to go ahead without a literature review. Literature review in this sense, it's very important as it also helps them to position themselves in that field of study and to know exactly what has been researched, what are the gaps in that research, and how to address those gaps in their own research.
Yes.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Jesse.
Thank you. I do not mean to, I'm not an expert in this area, and I didn't go into my PhD with a grounded theology or grounded theory background mindset. But my supervisor gave an advice because my research was really field-based. I was working with women with disabilities and HIV and what part faith played in their lives in dealing with the sociological challenges that they faced. And I did a little bit of literature review before I went into the field. But when I came back, my supervisor advised me to do my data analysis and interpretation before I do a detailed literature review. And I was worried about that because I felt that I may go on to not see what has already been written and probably be not inventing new wheels. But I realized that in hindsight that was a good practice for me because when I went back to do the literature review, I was able to critique what I found on the field with what had already been written. I was not afraid with what had already been written and silenced the voices of my women because if I had read about them, I would say, oh, this has already been said. I shouldn't say that anymore. But because I did my analysis, interpretation, completed those chapters before going to the in-depth literature review, it added value to my work in critiquing what I had done. So yeah, I know that literature review is good, and we're going to, of course, do it a lot. In fact, as part of the grant work, we're going into literature review now, but I'm just saying from my experience that I found it enriched my data analysis better going to literature review after I finished my analysis and interpretation. That is just one little small experience that I just had, and I just I should share that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Jesse, Rachel, the last minute.
I just wanted to say that within the circle of concerned African women theologians, we have this approach where we say God's word for women is what women have experienced about God. Yeah. So so I think this is grounded theology in a way. And from the start, I'm actually very curious about the people who talk about objectivity and things like that. But among the circle of concerned African women theologians, we come straightforward to say our research is subjective. We choose to be subjective for the mere fact that what is called objective has tended to be oppressive in another way. So I think that is the aspect which I wanted to bring in, that there's no there is no problem in using a theology of suspicion, you know. It's also as academic as what you would call objective theology. And I don't even believe in objective theology that it ever exists, because whatever we write is mirrored by so many mirrors that we put forward. Sure.
Joel, could I just finish with 20 seconds?
Oh, of course. Of course.
I just want to say thank you to all the participants. I really enormously valued the feedback and the experiences that you've shared. And I just, I mean, I suppose I'm a psychologist. I should learn that I do listen, but I really appreciate what you've shared, and I value the richness of it. And it's opened experiences that I could only dream of. There's that theme again. But look, I'm probably going to go to bed soon. I'm about 3 or 4 hours past my bedtime. So I can't really have meaningful conversations too much when I'm sleep deprived. But I invite everybody in this conference to communicate with me via my email, and I'll read it during the daylight hours in Australia and try and give you a more reasonable response. So my email is bstevens@csu.edu.au. Please take that. And feel free to write to me, and I assure you, you'll get a more intelligent response when it's not 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia time.
Yeah. Bruce, this has been a wonderful session, really fresh and eye-opening, and we're so grateful for your contributions.
Thank you, Joel.
Well, so now we have a 15-minute break, and then we return for presentations from our research teams. So as we break, Nellie and assistants, any announcements we need to know?
Yes, please, Joel.
Okay, Chief Assistant.
Yes, thanks again, Bruce, for that very deep and also fresh, but also provocative, discussion you brought.